Hello, and welcome to Regeneration Realized. In this video, we will show you how to monitor soil compaction. Looking at your soil's compaction gives you an idea of how effectively precipitation and air can infiltrate into your soil, how well the roots can navigate the soil space, and how much space there is for both macro and microorganisms to inhabit your soil. Soil compaction is measured using a penetrometer, which tells you the amount of pressure that must be exerted on the soil in order to push through it. Compacted soils are more dense and have less pore space. This means that there is less room for air and water to move between the soil particles. It also means that roots and microbes must work that much harder to move through the soil. Compaction is measured in psi, or pounds per square inch. This can readily be converted to kPa for those on a metric system. Once soil compaction reaches 200 psi, roots start to struggle to push through. At 300 psi, soil is virtually impenetrable to most roots. Monitoring compaction is a great way to get started with soil health. Compaction is very responsive to field management and can provide insights into a field's history. Highly compacted soils tend to suffer from many complications, including an inability to absorb water for usage by microbes and plants, as well as the inability for roots to enter deeper soil to access water and nutrients. It also affects the overall growth of your crops. The primary ecological process affected by soil compaction is the water cycle. However, the nutrient cycle, energy flow, and community dynamics are also negatively impacted by high levels of compaction. Soil compaction affects the water cycle by reducing infiltration, leading to runoff, erosion, and a lower effective precipitation. For example, less water available to your crops regardless of how much it rains. The nutrient cycle is affected by compaction because organisms are not able to easily maneuver through the soil to reach the nutrients they require for both their own metabolism and for exchange with plants. Energy flow is also impacted by compaction because the soil organic material and carbon become limited when dead plant matter and decaying organisms cannot be decomposed. And finally, community dynamics change in compacted soil because some organisms cannot tolerate the harsh conditions, leading to a reduction in biodiversity and an overall decline in soil fertility. Similarly, some crops cannot tolerate compaction, while certain weeds, including thistle, thrive in it, leading to unwanted weed pressure in agricultural fields.
So if you're following root protocols, you have two options for a soil tip for your penetrometer. If your soil is a bit more compact and it reaches compaction within the first 0 to 6 inches, you can use a smaller tip on the end of your penetrometer. And if you have looser soil that doesn't reach compaction within the first 0 to 6 inches, you can use a bigger tip for your penetrometer.
I'm going to move across the field in a W path, measuring compaction every 10 steps or so. I'm making sure not to travel in straight lines because compaction often occurs along tractor wheel lines, so I want to make sure I'm not just following a track that isn't representing the whole field. Here's the first spot. I'm going to take my penetrometer and place it over the soil. As you can see, the penetrometer has markings along the rod at 3-inch increments to help us gauge the depth that the penetrometer is able to penetrate into the soil. Up on the top is a pressure gauge that will increase as you exert more pressure to push it through more hard, compacted soils. So I'm going to start pressing the penetrometer into the soil, keeping a close eye on the pressure gauge. When the pressure gauge reaches 300 psi, I'm going to stop. If you continue to push down beyond 300 psi, you risk breaking your penetrometer. You also aren't really gaining much more useful information, as most plant roots can't penetrate beyond 300 psi anyway. So before I pull the penetrometer up out of the soil, I'm going to bend down and wrap my hand around the shaft of the penetrometer right at ground level. Once I pull it up, I can now read the depth at which I reached 300 psi. For example, the length of the shaft between the tip and my hand. In really great soils, you may be able to penetrate the soil all the way to the handlebars of the penetrometer before reaching 300 psi. This is great. Take note and continue on. Repeat this procedure across the field and take note of your findings. Here at RU, we follow the ROC criteria for rating soil compaction. If the pressure reaches 300 psi before the penetrometer reaches 20 centimeters, or 8 inches, this is fairly high compaction and should be given a ROC rating of fair. If the pressure reaches 300 psi after the penetrometer reaches 20 centimeters, or 8 inches, this is low compaction and should be given a ROC rating of good. If the penetrometer cannot enter the soil because it is too compact, this is very high compaction and should be given a ROC rating of poor. As you move your penetrometer through the soil, you may also be able to feel changes. Graininess that scratches against the shaft of the penetrometer when you hit sand, areas of temporary resistance when you hit hardpan, sometimes denoting the depth of historic tillage. Take note of your observations and come back to them over the years. Testing soil compaction is a very easy way to monitor your fields, and it tells you a lot about your soil and how it's able to interact with the rain it receives, the organisms that exist within it, and the plants that grow in it.